The conversation about Loive and whether or not her music is jazz or whether she's bringing back jazz is one of the most fascinating conversations about this music that I've encountered. The reason being is that what is going on with the fan base of the music has actually happened for a very long time. And I think it's important to look at that one aspect. Fan base. Now, when Loive had done some interviews and she was talking about jazz being kept from young people and how she mentioned she's bringing jazz back, it caused a lot of videos to be made. And they were good videos, but honestly, they got a little off track. And to be fair, it's easy to do because there's a lot of subjects to be covered out of that. But what I want to do is talk about what happened with the music in the 1950s and on. A lot of people, when they talk about the popularity of jazz or the lack thereof, they often look at the 1940s and the beginnings of the bebop music with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis. And it is true that the musicians shot themselves in the foot by not playing for dancing anymore. That was a fatal blow. However, the decade that you really need to look at is the 1950s. In the 50s, you had this contrast in which you had young people over here and adults over there. And the fact of the matter is, the adults were into the music of Clifford Brown and Miles Davis and John Coltrane and Sonny Rollins. You did have a more grown fan base into that music. However, the young kids were into Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis. That's what young kids were into. And it reminds me of a conversation that I had with a woman who was a teenager in the 1950s. And she was telling me that, yeah, I didn't really like jazz. It didn't have any melody. And of course, she didn't remember what she heard, but she told me that she loved Elvis Presley. She used to listen to Elvis and sing along to the tunes and iron her clothes and dance along. And that music was fun. So that's one contrast. The next contrast definitely is in the 1960s. Miles Davis arguably recorded probably one of his greatest live albums, probably his greatest live album of all time, at Philharmonic Hall in New York in 1964. It produced two live albums, My Funny Valentine and Four and More, okay? 3 days earlier, Ed Sullivan on his TV show made the following announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles. And that's what young people were into. They were not into the Miles Davis second quintet, as it's now referred to, or definitely not John Coltrane quartet. I mean, Love Supreme was really intense and advanced. So young people are saying, we're going to be over here checking out the Beatles. And so that was another example of young people being into this music, while the jazz audience, it had an audience, but it was slowly dwindling because the music was becoming more complex. Now, I've got one more contrast for you, and it involves my elder brother, Wynton Marsalis. He was fortunate to appear on the Grammy Awards in 1984, right? And he was able to play classical and play jazz, and it was a great night for him. Now, who was the big winner of that night? Michael Jackson for his album Thriller. Once again, that's what young people are into. They could care less about some trumpet player playing classical and jazz. They're not really interested in that unless maybe you play a musical instrument. But young people, they're into that. And so you've always had this contrast of jazz being for these for older audiences. Now, when I mentioned the Beatles, this reminded me of another conversation that I had with people who were young in the 1960s. And I mentioned to them, yeah, I play jazz. And they said, no, we were never into that. We got into music in the 1960s, but the music was changing, which I thought was a weird way to put that. But they said, yeah, the Beatles and the Stones. Oh, and by the way, they were from the UK. And they then tell me, yes, in 1960s, there was no jazz in London. And I said, yes, there was. The problem was it wasn't marketed in mainstream magazines. And the woman immediately says, you're right. And so that leads me to Loive. When Loive mentioned jazz being gatekept from young people, I'm going to go 50-50 on that. That's not entirely right, but it's not entirely wrong either. Now we're going to fast forward to the 2000s. And this is when corporations are coming in and they're taking control of the music. And so they're just looking at numbers. And jazz is not this million seller. So they just said, okay, we need to get rid of that. In fact, there's even a story that I've heard about one of the top two pop singers in this country. Yeah, two choices. And I think you know who they are. Pick one of them. And apparently when she was younger, she wanted to study jazz, but her parents said, oh, hell no, you're not about to do that. You're gonna become a star and make some money, because that's what they're looking at. They're looking at numbers. And so consequently, any jazz influence that could happen, that's been taken out of pop music. So if you're a young person coming up and it's the 2000s, you're not hearing any jazz. At the same time, you start to have the status quo belief that jazz isn't for young people. I mean, that's why you have some people saying that we shouldn't call it jazz anymore. Call it something else. Call it Black American music. But for the sake of argument, they say jazz is not for young people. Young people don't like jazz. Kids don't listen to that. And that's a very status quo belief. The reason that people believe that is because historically, young people didn't listen to the music. You didn't have young people in large quantities listening to it. They would listen to pop music. And so the young people, oh, yeah, well, you're not going to be into that. I also think that nowadays it's a marketing ploy, because now you can tell young people, oh, jazz, oh, no, you don't like that. No, you like pop music. Now come here, give me your money. Yeah, see this over here? That's pop music. You like that. And consequently, you get all of this music marketed towards them, and they're told, oh, jazz, this is this old style, and that's not relevant anymore, or whatever it is that they believe. So when an artist like LeVay comes along and she's singing standard songs and she's writing originals that are in the vein of standard songs, all of a sudden you get these young people that like it, but then they're sort of confused because they're like, wait, I like this music. I didn't think I'd like it. And then when they realize that they've never really heard jazz at all, that causes them to think, oh, she's bringing jazz back. Now, is she bringing the music back? No, because you have a lot of people singing the music and a lot of people are playing it out here. Now, if you want to say that she's bringing it back to pop music, that's actually a little more accurate, because like I said, the music was taken out of pop music. So if you want to talk about her bringing it back to that, then yeah, that's a fair point. And again, a lot of the young folks, now some of them have started to say, man, this is so great hearing this. This music is so hard to find. And that's a tricky one, because on the one hand, it is hard to find in a way because there's so much music that's out here, and there's so much that you can run into that you may not even like. Or you may like this thing, but then you may not like that thing, and it may not be the style that you're into. And honestly, some of these young people, I don't know if they would actually connect with some of the jazz singers we have now, because they're very accomplished and they know a lot of tunes and they're playing with a rhythm section that's swinging. I don't know if they would connect with that. But somebody like LeVay, when she's just playing guitar and singing these songs, and the scat singing she does is like really casual. It's not virtuosic singing like an Ella Fitzgerald. So I think that's another reason that they connect with that. And I think that with this fan base, I think that's when you started to hear statements like, oh, LeVay is bringing jazz back. And and this is music that, wow, young people like this? And I think that's why you had some saying that, oh, young people have been left out. That's not entirely true. But like I said, you did have corporate forces that were saying, oh, young people don't like that music. So that's a lot. And I know I've gone on for a while, but it's all of these things in this various subject matter is why this conversation about LeVay and this music is one of the most fascinating conversations I've encountered.